So I think, if you've seen anything about when I've talked about my formula for change, right? And sorry, not mine, Dan Miller's formula for change that I like so much. It's really about change first has to equal it only happens when you have first dissatisfaction. And you have to multiply that by a vision and then first concrete steps of action because all of that has to be greater than resistance, right? So when I thought about change and how change actually occurs, I see a lot of different companies at different maturity levels of change. And I've seen a lot of companies fail at this, and I've seen a lot of companies succeed. And I started thinking about that, about Dan Miller's formula for change, and how could we actually enable transformation. So I wrote this transformation framework. And the reason I'm bringing that up first is it has productization in it. But before that, you have to kind of know where you want to go. I always say, what does your company want to be when it grows up one day? And like you've got to know why you're doing that, for what reasons. You have to have a strategy to get there. And then after that, you can look at this transformation framework and ask yourself first, do you have like the culture, the skill set? Are you ready for this change? Do you have the tools and technology and people that are going to make that possible? The second step in that change is actually productization. So it's not just about the physicality of productization of the piece part, right? It's like, and it's a verb on purpose, right? We're sort of going from this world of prefabrication or conventional to a verb of productization that eventually ends in products, right? Becomes something. So this change we're in is in this productization mindset change, really for data reusability, the physicality of the piece part that can be reused, but also then the data associated with both the part itself, the extensible data that can live with it, but also the productized workflow that needs to happen. What's the process development, the stakeholders that take part in it? So productization is so much more than just like we made this wall into a wall panel. You know what I mean? Like, and I think you have to really take those are the first two steps of the transformation framework. And by the way, in Dan Miller's formula for change, I consider those the first concrete steps of action. You have to have foundational readiness, and then you have to productize things.
Yeah, there's so much in that. And in your transformation framework, you mentioned there is some resistance, there's culture change, there's a lot of stuff. So what are the sort of bottlenecks stopping us from having this transformation?
Look, I mean, I think at the basic premise, there's a million things stopping us internally from making this happen. I think let's start externally for a minute, which is why I came to Autodesk for my company. You cannot think that you're going to change this space if you use, Clayton Christensen's one of my heroes. He talked about the innovator's dilemma. I'm actually writing a book. You have it behind you? Love it. I love that. And rest in peace. I mean, he's an amazing man. But so really on my book I'm writing is like a condendium to his. It's like the innovator's deception. It's like he talked about an industry change. We are not an industry. We are an ecosystem of many different industries, all with different drivers for growth and change and how we make our money. So unfortunately, the same rules that he talked about chipping away bottom up don't apply to an ecosystem that have to be top down change, right? So you need the largest buyers to influence. You need the largest technology companies to enable it. You need the largest of the large to sort of put pressure downward. And yes, we need things to happen from the bottom up, but the big change is you need top down change, not little bottom up chip away at the incumbents like Clayton talked about. So I think we've talked a lot about cash for chaos in the past here, really at Autodesk in the last year. We have an ecosystem that really has thrived on cash for chaos for 100 years. We have architects that draw things that are never ever built. You have general contractors pricing and going out for bids on things that will never be bought from most of those people. And you have people making stuff and not the best that they can because they're sort of left with information downstream of whatever they can make do with. And we stick that back up to the front of the process. We create these iterative cycles. We sort of call them coordination meetings, if you will. But, we create so much digital waste through this that it ends in physical waste. Like I always say, digital waste exponentially leads to physical waste. So that's why at the top of that framework, it goes from productization to digitization, to connected platforms and, and capabilities that are enhanced all the way up through circularity, which is really about digital and physical reuse, right? So those steps in the framework are trying to eliminate that. I don't know. I think our biggest change is that we make money on a lot of wasteful things and people pay us for that. If you really want to break it down into the simplest simplest form. We get paid for a lot of things that are worthless in this space.
Absolutely. Now, it's funny you brought that up. I actually just finished that book last week, and he talks about the difference between sustaining technologies and disruptive technologies. And sustaining technologies from a big company, it's easy to find that incremental improvement, but I think he says something along the lines of big companies, it's hard for disruptive technologies because it's so emergent, I guess, that what the technologies and what sort of market they kind of find. So, I mean, with that in mind, just digging a bit deeper into that, what sort of disruptive technologies are there, and how can they be utilized by big companies with those?
I think that's a great question. Actually, I'm glad you read that book last week. What a happenstance, amazing encounter that is. Everything happens for a reason in life. So, I mean, look, Autodesk is a platform company that we are becoming more and more of a platform company. What do I mean by platform? There's a difference between products, software products, and a software platform. Products are very hard to make changes to individually. And you buy a product and it comes in the with the kit of things and whatever it does, its capabilities, and they don't necessarily connect to other products, and they might not have the capabilities you want. Some have others, but they're sort of point solutions, right? And what we are is not a point solution. We have a suite of products that also lives on the Forge platform. It's our development platform, but truly the Autodesk platform is built on that Forge foundation, along with our product, our suite of products, and the enabling what I like to call digital glue that lives between the big products at Autodesk that can be developed by anybody that wants to develop it on the Forge development platform, right? That digital glue is so important for what's happening in this future that I always tell companies, listen, when you productize that workflow right now, this convergence, because it's happening, it doesn't start in design anymore. Like you're not starting the information with somebody who doesn't know how things are necessarily made. You have to actually start with operational requirements and then what things are made out there, manufactured, that can inform design so that design can pick the right combination of those things that are already made and spend their times on the things where they're not made yet and they're more bespoke, to pass that back up to the players in the cloud to share the information of how it's going to be manufactured and integrated on site or built on site if it's something that still needs to be built on site and commissioned, and then take that data and pass it back to the front again so that we can improve upon this process, depending if you're the owner or the maker or the consumer of that data in the architectural community or the integrator of that. So it's like, this is so much more than about what Clayton talked about, which is why his book really needs a compendium and a next book, right? Because it's like he was talking about within a silo, and I'm talking about what if those 10 silos have to make a building? Because that's really what it is now, right? So manufacturing software isn't necessarily looked at by the AEC community, mechanical CAD, as being necessary. And I'm going to tell you that it is. Things like Inventor with iLogic or Fusion, and even our competing software, you need it down to the fastener level detail to actually inform something that you can actually still design it and customize it, but not lose its manufacturability. That's where we went wrong. This whole notion of DfMA, we went wrong with it because we heard the word design and we took it for a meaning it wasn't ever intended for.
Yeah, 100%. There's so much in that. So yeah, design for manufacturing and assembly. I think you were just talking about a term you phrased was data for manufacturing or assembly, or a bit of a pivot on that first D. So how can using CLT, for example, from a manufacturing point of view, you've got billet thicknesses, then you've got truck widths, or if you're shipping it overseas, you've got those constraints. So what sort of way can we get that data and, put it up front? Because there's so much for a designer to take in, and they just can't possibly know all the...
Well, you said it right. The only way we've been able to get that up front, by the way, funny enough, we're mostly in Australia in this podcast, right? I know you go other places, but I remember I did a job in Australia once. This is a true story. I won't say for who. I'm protecting the names of the guilty and the innocent. And I was like, how does that CLT detail work? How does that happen? And everyone kind of looked at me like, why do you need to know that? And I was like, well, what do you mean? We need to know all these details because rarely are you going to be able to use a detail as is, right? And I think this is what's really important about what you just said. Our only solution for taking someone's detail and first informing somebody that that detail exists, that rule exists, that constraint, and I don't mean constraint of, we use that word, I don't love that word. When we talk in software about rules and constraints, constraint means it's adjacencies and how it interacts with adjacencies. It doesn't mean how it doesn't work. Constraint's like a negative word, and that's not what it means. It's like, what are the internal rules of the product itself, the assembly itself, let's say, right? And then what are the constraints? How does it interact with the things next to it to make sure that I understand if I change those, I might need to change the way in which it interacts. Those are actually called constraints. And so I don't love that again, but so rules and constraints. So it's like if their rules and constraints are not captured in the technology, forget about your mouth. Those days are over. Like I always say, I'm 50 years old. I only have so knock wood. Hopefully I have a few more, but I have only so many years where I can go to the front of the process and be like, this is how you have to work with my product. Like, if your whole business model is based on some specialist getting up to talk to the architect, it's broken. Feet and mouths don't work anymore. That's what you have to remember. By the way, it needs to be captured in some technology that they can consume that data, right? And they can actually make an adjustment to that, but the rules and constraints still apply without them having to go back every time and say, can I make it bigger? Do you have a truck that big? Does the container work that? It's too hard. Why do you think that we're like never right with our money and schedule? Because that data is impossible even to get by people's mouths and feet. Like it just takes too long. And by the way, funny enough, if you think about the thousands of interdependent assemblies that you need, how can you forget about one assembly, making sure you know the rules and constraints of how that works? Now you have to make that with thousands of interdependent assembly choices. So which one takes priority and how does that work? And usually it's who's getting paid first, who talks the loudest and wants to get paid. And that's what we do, but that's not right, right? Like that doesn't necessarily give us the right solution. So I think we have to think about this. It's about the data. And that's why I think we got DfMA wrong, because most architects actually don't know those rules and constraints. And if you capture them in the wrong tool, a design tool that doesn't stop you from making it unmanufacturable, it doesn't matter even if you had the information right the first time, because inevitably you have to make some adjustment that you now have the wrong data, right? So it has to be the right data using the right tool with the right behavior. And then, yeah, I don't expect architects to work in anything other than what they're used to working in. So I'm not expecting them to somehow all of a sudden become makers. The makers have to step up and capture that in actual manufacturing software to be consumed by the design software, right? By the way, Adam, I always think like generators are my favorite example, right? It's like no architect wakes up in the morning and they're like, I don't care that they make a 200 and a 250. I'm going to design a 217 and a half today. Go screw them. They don't do that, right? Because they don't go, that alternator is not how I want it. I'm going to make it better. They don't do that. That's a product. They know the scalable capacities of that product and the inputs and outputs and the lead times and costs and footprints and constraints. And that's how they design around that, right? We need more things like that.
Yeah, 100%. And the data's just not there, so it's no one's fault. And then I guess it's even for the cost certainty for a supplier, like, if they get an architect's LOD 200 model, and then how can you quickly translate to how much CNC machine time, how much time in the factory? It's almost an impossible task. So,
Right.
then maybe an extra margin has to be put on because there's so much uncertainty in translating that into what the DfMA sort of or using the old term of DfMA,
Yeah.
ability of it is.
I mean, think about what you just said. I've actually never said this in public before, so I don't want like every architect to yell at me, just for the record. I've never said this before. True. Think about the LODs. They're actually placeholder data so that the next layer of data actually fills in that data. That whole notion is actually not efficient in some way, right? Like I've never said that in public before, I don't think. But like I'm not a fan of LOD because I think there are certain things. By the way, when you did LOD 100 and you put a placeholder that you took a generator in because it was the actual product and you stuck it in your drawing, is that LOD 100? No, you took the product and now that guy can make it off of that, even at LOD 100, right? What if everything acted like that? Why would I need further LOD if a lot of things came in at manufacturing level of design and detail, right? Like, and data. So, like, the notion of that is like, again, like Phil Bernstein was my counterpart when it comes to evangelizing and talking about the thought leadership at building information modeling. I really love Phil and what he spoke about and how he moved us to this milestone of building information modeling, which is great. You need that in order to consume the data I'm talking about. But the I in his building information modeling vision must become more intelligent. And in order to make it more intelligent, you need to have the makers. And I mean makers, both the manufacturers for building products and the people that are fabricating things right now, as it's more of like the AEC fabricators that are prefabricating things. That converges too, not just process horizontally. But that I has to start becoming more informed. For what reason do you have to wait for that information to get real? If it was real to start with. You know what I mean? Like it just you need the heavy lift is productizing the information to be real from the start. Right?
Yeah, 100%. Well, that's such an exciting, and it sort of solves another problem which I was going to ask you about, like, because we do have so many case studies on this podcast, and something that comes up quite a bit is just like the amount of modeling. You got the engineer doing a model, supplier rebuilding the model at the very end, the architect rebuilding the model. It's like, how do we solve this problem to actually, I mean, some projects might get it right, but it just seems it hardly ever happens perfectly where everyone's just working off the same model and you're just going into the right level of detail up to manufacturing.
I think the notion of like, first of all, I don't know if when I said it needs to consume that data, we all know that the model can't be so heavy that it's unusable, right? Like there's something called level of abstraction, right? So I think we need to first, the heavy lift is productizing things. Look, Kohler and Cummins and anybody that makes a generator didn't start up in one day and be like, that's my full product line and that's how it works. No, product development, life cycle, like all that takes time. And so the places around the world I'm seeing people understand both product and process development. So like what is the product they want to make in their fabrication facility, or and then what is the process of how they make it, not just the bill of materials but the bill of process, the process development. What workflow is attached to that with a tech perspective after you understand what it is, how it's made, and then what tech and what data needs to be attached. It's like I think we have to recognize that like the word model even to me is a little bit like strange almost at this point. It's like I think there's levels of abstraction of the model. But here's what I do know about the model I want everybody in real time or models to be working on. I think they need to be informed with the data and only the data they need at that time. So it's like it still acts. Let's take a skid as an example, a pump skid. I don't need at a certain point every level of detail of the fasteners down in that pump skid, but I wanted it defined that way so that when I consume the skid into, let's say, my LOD 100 and I move things around, I don't necessarily have to see all the fasteners, but that skid's rules still apply. It still acts and behaves like the skid. It doesn't all of a sudden lose all of its data. So the data has to be associated with it all the time. So it's like, it's funny for those of you who have kids, and I have a 13-year-old daughter, and she was a big fan of Dora the Explorer, right? Do you have kids, Adam? I like to, no kids yet? So when you have kids, you'll have to watch that show. But basically, she has a magical backpack on, this little girl that travels the world. Maybe that's why I like it so much. I've traveled the world. But she has a little magical backpack. And when she needs something out of it, she goes, I need rope. And then rope pops out. When she needs a ruler pops out and it goes back in, right? So it's almost like that skid needs a data backpack associated with it, like Dora the Explorer has, so that I carry that. It's not so heavy, but only when I need that compute for that skill set or that tool does it come out and I can reference it from the cloud and pull it into whatever I need to compute. You know what I mean? That's the future of this. That data packet, that data backpack associated. By the way, you can only have that if you have a product it's associated with, right? You can't just have data flying out there loose that's not attached to anything. It needs something to put the backpack on, right? Once you have that product physically, you can put the data associated with that for many different extensible types of data that can then travel across this life cycle of, even if you just say across our platform at Forge, to be pulled out when you need it and be computed in a certain way or be consumed by some product, ours, somebody else on the Forge platform. Because like you may not need the same data when you're the sustainability expert as you want when you're like the procurement guy or you're whatever, so I think we have to start thinking of things like that. And it becomes easier when you think about them chunked into productization, right? So
Yeah, that's totally makes sense because I guess the one of the um, big things on offer from productization is like kit of parts where you just get something modular, but you still need to connect them together somehow. So what you're
yeah.
saying, I guess, is having that flexibility, enough flexibility to to enable modular, but also, yeah, as you said, sustainability consultant to jump in and
Whatever it is. You know, it's funny you said kit of parts, like, and I think we've gone a little bit overboard on kit of parts, right? Like, so I'll tell you a great story from my friends in the U.S. I think I told them I was going to tell the story. One of my friends at DPR, which is a big tier one building company, construction company, right? And one of the guys over there was telling a story that he bought an IKEA dresser. Everyone says kit of parts, and then everyone goes to IKEA, right? We all say we want construction sites to be like IKEA, right? And he's like, listen, my daughter and I bought a dresser on a Tuesday. We were going to do it and put it together on Saturday together. She's 12 years old. It came on a Thursday. I was traveling. She put it together herself without him and like easily by herself and put the dresser together on that Thursday night. Now, we could use that as the example and be like, see, that's why everything needs to be a kit of parts. And isn't that magical? And the non expert could put it together as intuitively. Well, that's fine, but that's not the magic. We keep talking about it as if it's the magic. That's the result of the magic, I think. The real magic is the heavy engineering that got done before the 12-year-old even orders the thing. So that heavy engineering of manufactured pieces and parts, of pre-kitting, of what's going to go, of what the tooling should look like, of how they're going to communicate the instructions. We never talk about any of that in our space. We all talk about it just should be plug and play. Well, how do you think it got there? Like, we're not willing to do the really, really hard work to let the 12-year-old one day put it together. That's where I feel like we went horribly wrong on this side, right? We're like, we just want the result. We're not willing to do the hard work or even recognize that that wasn't the work, that was the result of the work, right?
100%. There was so much hard work to get done before we can do that.
Well, who's going to do that work? Right? So that's what it comes down to now. It's like, okay, you want that result. It's not going to, I can't wave my Queen of Prefab magic fairy wand and make it happen. I wish I could. But like, who's going to do that heavy lifting now? And by the way, the groups that do are the groups that will still be here in 10 years or 15 years or 20 years. The groups that don't, some of them will be fast followers and maybe they'll be here. The groups that think it's not happening, they will not exist. I believe that. I will tell you, if you read the McKinsey report, The New Normal, there are both winners and losers in the new future. And like, unless you, by the way, funny enough, I think 6 years ago, 5 years ago, one of my friends from a big company that does a lot of prefab and a lot of productization now said, this is not a journey anymore. This is a race. And if you don't recognize that it's a race, you're not in it. Like, you might be like behind the eight ball at this point. So if you don't recognize that this is a race out there, a global race, you're probably not in it.
Wow. Yeah. Well, there's so much there and so much on the horizon. And Autodesk is obviously at the cusp of innovation. So you've mentioned a few technologies already, but are there any ones that are standing out or just really on the cusp of making some big moves at the moment?
I mean, listen, I can't make any product promises or anything like that. These products already exist at Autodesk, right? I think the really cool thing is that I came to Autodesk on purpose, right? So like Andrew Anagnost, my CEO, said to me, why here? Like, you can go work anywhere. Why would you come here? And I was like, let's pretend that industrialized construction and this convergence that's going on is like chess. And I'm like a chess master. I'm like obsessed. By the way, I'm not married. Most of my friends know that about me. Why? Because I sleep with my phone. And I've got guys, even from Australia, like Aidan Kavanaugh, that send me pictures of his awesome fabrication shop every morning, all the time, from all over the world, right? I have friends all over because I sleep with this phone. I'm obsessed with chess, let's say. However, Autodesk, I came here because I believe we have like 90% of all the chess pieces to play chess. I think the rest will be filled in by Forge, which is the nicest chessboard on the planet that I've found. I just believe for years we've had the chess pieces potentially set up to play a game called Mahjong, not necessarily chess, right? You sort of have to like rearrange the chess pieces, which is what manufacturing informed design is, right? It's like putting the data where it actually belongs in front of the design process and utilizing the information in a way that's going to give you insights and analytics and actually allow you to be predictive. So, I mean, I really think all the products at Autodesk are amazing. I mean, if you think about the Autodesk Construction Cloud is totally built on Forge from the get-go. So if you're thinking about things like Building Connected or, Build right now or, Trade Tap or anything that we have going on in the Autodesk Construction Cloud, it's like the whole Construction Cloud is already built on Forge, and lots of the cloud products like Fusion are built on Forge. And as more and more get into those cloud-based, products or in extensions, the better it will be. I think funny enough, I'm mostly excited for the digital glue that's coming from the ecosystem and from within our own space in Autodesk. But again, it's like I always say my phone. This is my phone. It's an Apple platform, right? It came with preloaded software on it. Those are Apple apps. But there's a whole app store of really cool stuff. Some stuff you don't even like, but I think is amazing. And it makes my end user experience better, which is different than your end user experience. I know, because I have kids and you don't. There's lots of things on here that were for my kid that you don't have that make my phone better for me, right? I'm single, so this is my entertainment, my dating, my babysitter, all those things. Why? Not because it came with preloaded things, because the app store and the enhanced environment of all these great things that are personalized that I can choose from for my productization workflow, if you will, make my end user experience better. That's what's so exciting. I think, gone are the days or quickly going away of siloed capabilities. And I think, we're a part of that, but even more exciting is the world is a part of that and can be a part of that if they want to be.
Absolutely. Well, it's been an absolute awesome chatting to you today, Amy. Yeah, there's so much to learn from you. You mentioned a couple of final questions. You mentioned one book, The Innovator's Dilemma. Is there any other books that, on the same sort of category that you like that you can recommend that are on point to what we've been discussing today?
It's funny. I love a book. I love this book. You can't see my bookshelf because it's got books on it sometimes I get in trouble for. But here's my bookshelf, right? I love this book. It starts with one. I think it's a little backwards now. You're seeing it backwards. But I love this book. It starts with one. Changing Individuals, Changing Organizations by J. Stewart Black. I think it talks about why change doesn't happen, right? I think people don't see it. They don't see the threat or opportunity. They don't move fast enough. They don't go far enough. Why it happens, why people stop you. I love that book. I think, most places in our ecosystem, everything, how do you go? I go in front of multi-billion-dollar companies and I'm like, hey, I don't think you're doing this the best way you could. And they're like, we're a multi-billion-dollar company. Like, why, how could you tell us that? And I'm like, listen, what got you there and what's based in success, the environment has changed now. The markets have changed, technology has changed, labor has changed, so much has changed. And there's a really cool graph, I think in chapter 2 about this. It's like you do the wrong thing now because of every change that has happened, but you still do the wrong thing really, really well. Right? So you're still making your margins got smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. It's like, well, you got to transition to do the new right thing, but you don't get to do that well at first. You have to do that poorly. That's how the quadrants work. And the faster you can get through doing it poorly to get to doing it well again, it's cyclical, right? And I think people don't move fast enough to get to the new right thing and doing it really, really well. And they don't think about how they can mitigate some of the change and pain, mostly because it's tough for us. We're in a project-centric world in our space. You have to think long game. If you're not thinking long game right now, you're stuck in project centricity and you're handcuffed by that and you'll never be able to get out of it to innovate. So I love the long answer to your question, but I love It Starts With One. I think it talks a lot about change because I'm secretly an agent for change, not for industrialized construction, if you really want to know.
Yeah, I kind of get that vibe, which is great. So, if people want to find out more about yourself, I mean, you've got a lot of projects on the go. Queen of Prefab on YouTube. There's a show that's killing it. You got a new book coming out. So yeah, can you just plug?
Yeah.
I guess all the stuff you're working on.
Oof. Let's see. On Autodesk's YouTube site, on the main Autodesk site, there's a Queen of Prefab playlist. The first 3 episodes I think now have well over 3 million views, and we just posted up in June. And now I have a 4th episode coming out. My goal is to shoot another episode in Australia next year. So I've talked to a bunch of friends. I'd love to come and do an episode in Australia. Love to go do one, Middle East and Europe and even Latin America next year and maybe Asia as well. So that Queen of Prefab show, that's up there. I mean, definitely you'll see some stuff on LinkedIn all the time about me. And I try to answer back every single person that talks to me on LinkedIn. As you know, Adam, I'm really good at responding because I believe in what's happening. And look, you've got great things going on down there in Australia. I just had my friend Mary Hardy come and talk at Autodesk University recently, and trying to get more and more stuff because you've got some great innovation going down in Australia and New Zealand. My great friends down there. I'm hoping to, by the way, I hope to make it down there for the Women's World Cup in rugby next year down in New Zealand because go Black Ferns. Sorry, I'm obsessed with the Black Ferns. So they know I follow them on social media. I'm like the stalker on social media of all things Black Ferns. So yeah, that's what's going on with me. Find me on Instagram or even TikTok. I do some fun stuff on TikTok, but LinkedIn for sure. It gets progressively more, and Twitter gets progressively probably more fun as you get to TikTok, but more personal. But yeah, check it out.